He was a conqueror, known for his violent temper, who somehow became a champion for one of the world's great religions of peace. It's a fascinating contradiction. Today, we're diving into the puzzle of Kanishka the Great, emperor of the Kushan dynasty, a man of immense power who stood right at the crossroads of civilization.
So before he was known as this great patron, this was his reputation. Buddhist sources paint a picture of a really fierce, hot-tempered warrior. And that's our starting point, Kanishka, the formidable king.
And that brings us to the big question, right? How does a man with a reputation for violence become a champion for religion that's all about peace and enlightenment? It's a story of an incredible and maybe even unlikely transformation.
To even begin to answer that, we first need to get a sense of the sheer scale of his power. Because before he was the patron, he was the conqueror. So let's take a look at the empire he commanded.
Now, this wasn't just some kingdom. It was a sprawling multicultural superstate. His empire was basically the central hub of the ancient world. It connected the Roman Empire in the west with Han China in the east through the legendary Silk Road. And if you controlled that, you controlled the flow of goods, wealth, and, most importantly, ideas. And that becomes absolutely crucial to his story.
So how do you manage an empire this vast? Well, check this out. It shows his really clever administrative strategy. Not one, but two major capitals. You had Purushapura, which is modern-day Peshawar, as his main seat of power. And then Mathura in India served as a crucial secondary hub, really anchoring his control over that rich Gangetic plain.
And let's be clear, his rule wasn't just about managing trade routes, it was forged in battle. He pushed deep into India, he took on the mighty Han dynasty in Central Asia, and he even fought off an invasion from the Parthian Empire. The man was, without a doubt, a serious empire builder.
But you know, conquest is only half the story. The really fascinating part is what he did with all that power. And this brings us to the second part of our story, Kanishka, the patron of art and faith.
Okay, so if you want to understand Kanishka's genius, you have got to get this one concept, religious syncretism. His empire was a total melting pot of cultures, Greek, Persian, Indian, you name it. Now, instead of forcing one belief system on everyone, which is what most empires did, he blended them. This wasn't just about tolerance, it was a sophisticated and pretty revolutionary tool of governance.
And his coins tell this story brilliantly. Think of it in three parts. In the beginning, his coins look very Greek. They've got gods like Helios and use Greek writing. It's a nod to the Hellenistic legacy of the lands he now ruled.
But then there's a shift. As his reign goes on, the Greek gods start to fade, and in come Iranian and Indian deities. We see figures from Zoroastrianism and even the Hindu god Shiva. He also swaps out Greek for the local Bactrian language. You can see him adapting his whole imperial image to fit his subjects.
And then, something totally unprecedented happens. For the first time in history, the image of the Buddha appears on a coin. This was a monumental step. It wasn't just a political statement, it was a powerful declaration of his patronage and a huge moment in the history of Buddhist art. And this wasn't just some passive support, you know? Kanishka took an active role in shaping the future of the faith. He organized the Fourth Buddhist Council in Kashmir. This was a pivotal event that really helped define the doctrines of Mahayana Buddhism, which is the branch that would eventually spread all the way to China, Korea, and Japan. You know, a great ruler often surrounds himself with great minds. And wow, just look at this lineup of intellectual superstars at his court. He was the patron of the Buddhist poet Ashvaghosha, the scholar Vasamitra, who actually led the council, and even Charaka, whose work on medicine became a foundational text of Ayurveda. This was a golden age of culture and science.
So conqueror, unifier, patron. The picture seems pretty clear, right? Well, not so fast. This is where the story gets really complicated, and we enter the world of scholarly debate.
This right here is the central puzzle of Kanishka's reign. History gives us two completely contradictory portraits of the guy. On one hand, he's the great patron who built monasteries and organized that huge Buddhist council. But on the other hand, some sources claim he was a persecutor who destroyed monasteries and even ordered the execution of the famous monk Nagarjuna. So how do we reconcile these two figures? Honestly, historians are still trying to figure that one out.
Okay, so to ground all this in reality, let's look at a quick timeline of his reign. Most scholars place his ascension around 127 CE, and right from the get-go we see these major moves, changing the official language and commissioning incredible works of religious art, like the famous Kanishka casket, which held relics of the Buddha himself.
But his legacy isn't just something stuck in ancient history. Get this. While the exact date he took the throne is still debated, he's often credited with starting the Shaka calendar era back in 78 CE. And here's the kicker. That same calendar is still one of the official civil calendars used by the government of India today. That's a lasting impact.
Okay, we have covered a lot of ground, from conqueror to patron to historical puzzle. So let's try and distill this really complex figure down. Here is Kanishka in 5 key points.
So what are the big takeaways? First, he was the empire builder, forging this massive state right at Asia's crossroads. Second, the master of syncretism, using culture as a powerful tool of governance. Third, the Buddhist patron, who fundamentally shaped the future of the religion. Fourth, the economic unifier, controlling the engine of global trade. And finally, the historical enigma, a man remembered in radically different ways, whose full story is still a bit of a puzzle.
And that leaves us with one last fascinating question. At its height, the Kushan Empire was considered one of the 4 great powers of the world, right up there with Rome, Parthia, and Han China. So why, when we think of great ancient empires, is Kanishka's incredible multicultural world so often overlooked? It's definitely something to think about.